Good afternoon, Abraham. Thank you for the processes that you've offered so far. I'm sure that many of us will start using it as soon as we get out, maybe even here. And you touched on a subject I want to revisit. You mentioned that all of illnesses is a resistance to.
Because well-being is your desire and what you're constantly asking for at many levels. And well-being is what is being offered. And so the only thing that could possibly be between you and well-being is resistance. If it were not for resistance, you would all be well.
I suffer from migraines that occur with my cycle. So it's something that happens regularly on a monthly basis. And I've been dealing with this for many, many, many years. So I would like to have some clarity on that. And what is it, personally for me, that I'm resisting? Why is it that I haven't been able to find some relief with regards to this issue?
Well, now think about the words that you're offering even here. Because you are a powerful being who loves the free feeling of empowerment. And nothing, as we've said several times today, is more on the other end of the scale than the feeling of disempowerment. So now think about what you are saying about these headaches. They come, they are out of my control, and they come with my natural cycle, which is also out of my control. In other words, I am powerless to do anything about this, like my cycle, which none of us have ever liked. This is added insult to injury. In other words, I couldn't do anything about that. No woman can, short of something drastic, which we will try to put off as long as possible. And the migraine headache is just added insult to injury. In other words, isn't that pretty accurate statement? And so we can understand why there would be huge resistance in that idea. Now, let's talk about, just softly, because we really don't want to spend a lot of time here. Can you imagine the sweet relief at being totally at one with the rhythm of your body?
Yes.
Can you imagine the sweet relief in being totally at one with the womanness of your body? In other words, there are female and there are male, and there is a sort of contentious battle that seems to be going on. And we notice, and we're just going to offer this to you lightly, that women that we have interacted with who have had the greatest struggle with their cycle are very often, not always, but very often those that have a similar struggle with the idea of male and female. In other words, very often they have at early stages of their life developed patterns for whatever reason of pushing against. And often it comes back to that feeling of control. Often the most powerful beings who come forth, who want to know their freedom, who at early ages find loss of freedom, very often they are the ones that have these feelings of resistance that pop up in other ways. Are we ringing any bells here?
Oh, absolutely.
So as we poke around here for the sore spot, you can feel that what it really amounts to is a sort of feeling of loss of power. Something that is being done to me by who knows what, for reasons that maybe I can accept, but I don't have to like it. And so where would you say your set point is, your starting point in all of this? Would you call it disempowerment? Is it that strong?
Yes, I think it is that strong. I think it is disempowerment. When a migraine comes on, or when I don't have the control, it seems to come out of, without my wanting it to happen, then yes, it's disempowerment.
Now we can see this easily from our broader perspective. So there is disempowerment, which you are pushing against, which becomes more and eventually is trained into the byproduct of a headache. And then the headache is that which you then begin to push against. And so what we're wanting you to understand is that in moments that you have no headache, when you are reaching for feelings of more empowerment, there will be less likelihood of the next headache. If you tend to the resistance, which is really at the root of the headache. Now the question sometimes will come is, well then why does it come mostly with my cycle? And we say, well, because that's another subject that you've been pushing against. In other words, they sort of dovetail because they are vibrationally similar. So in times when you are not in the middle of your cycle, or when you are on the other end of it, when you are feeling better and you are deliberately reaching for greater thoughts of freedom, and you are deliberately not pushing against things that you feel that you don't have any power over, what you begin to discover is that one thing you always have power over is how you feel. And can you feel how one of those headaches that is blinding, where it feels like your headache is sort of thinking you rather than you thinking it? It's like in that moment, that's not the time to reach for a thought that feels better, because it feels like you're out of control of any thought process. But there are so many times that you are in control of what you think and how you feel. And if you will exercise that time, it's our promise to you that if once you've been through your next cycle, if as soon as you begin feeling better again, you start reaching for thoughts that give you relief, that headache will never return again, even as soon as the next time your cycle comes around.
So are you talking about when I'm not in the middle of it, obviously, because I really don't have a lot of control?
We're talking about it not being about the headache and not being about the cycle, because what's happening to you is not as a result of anything other than resistance.
Right.
But it's resistance that you don't know you're offering because you haven't been paying attention to the way you feel, and you haven't deliberately been reaching for relief. It's like when somebody makes you mad in traffic and you feel that urge to push against, that's part of the practice thought that later on ends up in a headache.
Okay.
And so as you are moment by moment saying, is this thought taking me closer to where I want to be or further from where I want to be? And you are conscientiously reaching for the thought that gives you relief, then you will never again be in a place where you have to reach for the pill to give you relief from the headache. As you give yourself the subtle relief from the not so painful thoughts
on a day-to-day basis,
on a day-to-day, on a moment-to-moment basis, then the resistance will never again culminate again in that powerful headache. Negative emotion is your indicator of resistance. And just like the indicator on your dashboard of the level of your fuel, when you have negative emotion, it means you have resisted the energy and you're low on connection, so to speak. And when you choose thoughts of relief, it's like filling up your tank a little bit. It's like allowing the energy to flow. Esther had an interesting experience the other evening because she's been listening to us very keenly about this business because she feels us talking about which side of this are you on. And so she's been paying attention to the thoughts that go on inside her own head in response to different things that show up in her life. And she's been noticing that sometimes she's deliberately beating the drum that makes it worse. And more often in order to justify where she's standing. And more she's deliberately beating the drum that gives her the feeling of relief. And the operative word, the word that makes it work for you, the thing you have to hold in your mind that is your dominant intention, is you have to reach for relief. In other words, it would be easy to feel a headache lift off of you. That would be palpable relief. But sometimes the relief between overwhelmment and frustration is so subtle that you can't even feel it. In other words, you have to play with it a little while before you're sensitive enough to feel that you're actually releasing resistance, you see. So the other evening, after a day of driving and a day of thinking about hundreds of things and trying to find which way she was going on them as she tried to move up the vibrational meter on all of these subjects, Esther laid in her bed after a day of driving and felt a subtle, not very significant, but noticeable headache. So she laid in the bed. Jerry was already asleep, and she reached for the feeling of relief of the headache. And the headache was so mild that just by reaching for the relief of it, she was able to focus more on the relief than she was on the headache, and the headache was then invisible to her. It was a very interesting thing because she could look there and find the headache, and she could look over there and it would not be there. Now, that's a mild headache, but as you begin to pay attention to the way thoughts feel, you could stand in the midst of anything and find relief. Now, sometimes this is scary to people because they think that we're trying to teach you how to be able to ignore pain or how to be able to ignore circumstances that you don't want, not change them, just ignore them. And we say, well, really, that is what we're trying to teach you to do, because if you could ignore the circumstances long enough to consistently feel relief, then the circumstance has to change in response to your newfound vibration, you see. So whether you're talking about menstrual cycle, whether you're talking about somebody hitting you over the head with a hammer, in other words, it does not matter what the cause of any of it is. When you find the thought that gives you relief, the feeling of well-being has to follow. The physical condition has to follow. All a headache is anyway is evidence of resistance.
Or any illness, for that matter, is evidence of resistance.
Any negative emotion or any uncomfortable sensation or any illness is evidence of resistance. And every bit of it can be left behind. Every bit of it. We don't care if you have 25 deadly diagnosed disease. It would not matter. One thought and one feeling of relief at a time, you could leave them all behind. But the reason that we're encouraging you to just jump into your life right where you are, and instead of dealing with the illness or dealing with the headache, that you deal with the thought, is because so often people go to a physician and they get the pill or they get the drug or they get the surgery or they get the whatever in order to temporarily restore them to what they would call well-being, but because they haven't changed the thoughts, then it just squirts out in another way. In other words, until you deal with what is the root of your resistance, it's going to keep turning up. We are not big proponents of getting to the root of something if it's not coming up on a regular basis. But if it is coming up on a regular basis, why not move it to a new place?
Good.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, indeed.